Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of the Let's Talk Nautical podcast. My name is Marvin, and I'm happy to be here with my colleagues Razvan and Yannis. Before we start, I want to thank everyone who has listened to our first episode, where we talked about the recent incident of the 1 APOS, about weather in passage planning, and about decision making. After the release, we had an interesting discussion on the SafeLearn LinkedIn page, and we also received some comments on YouTube. Thanks to everyone for that.
Yes, thank you for your comments. Also, welcome from my side. In today's episode, we will be talking about an incident that happened roughly 12 years ago, on the 15th of January in 2009. Razvan, maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
No, hi, Anis. Thanks. Yeah, indeed. I would say that a miracle happened, or as some call it, the miracle on the Hudson. It's about an airplane, an Airbus A320, operated by the US Airways, which took off from LaGuardia Airport at approximately 3:25 p.m. It was destined for Charlotte, North Carolina. On board there were 5 crew members, including Captain Chesley Sullenberger, or Captain Sully, as he became to know better, and 150 passengers. Now, about 2 minutes into the flight, the airplane flew into a flock of birds. These were Canada geese. They were having quite a long wingspan, so big birds. And as a result, both engines were damaged and they lost thrust. So imagine that they lost thrust in the worst possible moment after they took off. So they were gaining altitude. After repeated attempts to restart the engines, the operation was unsuccessful. So Captain Sullenberger notified the LaGuardia airport control, the air control, that he was returning to the airport. However, as the plane continued to descend in a glide, he believed that they are not going to make it. It would be unable to reach the airport. Then the air traffic controller suggested them another alternative, to go to New Jersey, which was kind of on the right of their flight path. But this was quickly ruled out. So in the end, the Captain Sullenberger notified the control that he was going to be on the Hudson. So basically, attempt to land on the water, or I think ditching. This is how it's called, the water landing. At approximately 3:29. So that's 4 minutes after the takeoff. So 4 minutes after takeoff, he announced on the PA, I think the words that any captain doesn't want to, which is brace for impact. There were five, if I'm not mistaken, 5 people who were injured, but there were no fatalities. So imagine that you just took off with the plane, and after 2.5 minutes, you have lost thrust and you don't have any engines, and you are over a densely populated area, which is New York. Did you guys heard of this story, of this incident?
After, and again now from the anniversary, whatever we want to call it, I saw some articles, but otherwise the details, they were not so present in my mind. I think it's one of these things, even though it was famous, and I think even a movie about it, somehow the incidents or the accidents actually that don't end up so tragically, they tend to be easier to forgotten than the huge big deals. I mean, because if you think of the history, Exxon Valdez, Event Horizon, they are always names. This one, even though it became famous as a story, it didn't become that famous. Even though I think it also had quite a large regulatory impact. This is how I remember it. But do you remember what it?
Yeah, for me, it came to mind again when the movie that you mentioned, the Sully movie, hit the cinemas. I heard about it briefly when it was on the news, the miracle on the Hudson. But to be honest, I didn't follow it that much. Then when I watched the movie, I have to say I enjoyed it. Okay, then I did some more researching on it. I found it very impressive, actually. As what they show in the movie, the teamwork, how the whole team worked together. Captain Sully, his co-pilot, or the first officer, who actually, what I found out later, it seemed to me they were working together for years, but I found out later that he himself actually was also working as a pilot. He was working also as a pilot, but due to I think some cuttings at the airlines or something, he was assigned as a first officer to him. So he was actually what he mentioned as well, very, very lucky that he had such an experienced first officer there. And for me, they had this in the movie, also what Sully said afterwards. It was this blind understanding and understanding without words, which I found very impressive. And as I thought, they knew each other for years, which I figured out afterwards they didn't. What was it for you, Razvan, that was most important on this?
Actually, what intrigued me,
what intrigued you most?
I have first heard about this incident. I think it was somewhere in 2014 when I attended a maritime resource management course. Back when I was an officer, and this course was taught by a captain, ship captain, and it was about decision making in emergency and crisis situations. And this was given to us like a case study, and I was fascinated and also intrigued by it, because especially after when I studied a bit the report and see exactly the chain of events that happened, and also reading about some interviews that after that Captain Sully was giving to the media, and I was really fascinated by his leadership skills and his this commitment to excellence, because I kind of started to dip more and read about his history, because in the end you don't hear and you don't see this every day, and I really wanted to know more about him and try to understand how he was thinking when he was making decisions, because I kind of wanted to use that and see what I can learn and apply in my job as a deck officer. And I remember a quote from him. I will just read it now. So there was a reporter who asked him, what can other pilots learn from your experience? And he replied, and I quote, one of the things I encourage other pilots to think about is that out of a 43-year career, my entire life is being judged on the basis of those 3 minutes and 28 seconds. We never know which flight will test us, so it's incumbent on each of us to be vigilant and avoid complacency. I had gotten to a point late in my career when I thought that the test would never happen to me. I was wrong. And then he started to talk about how he perceives his mind as a bank of knowledge, and he's trying to put small deposits of knowledge day by day. Yeah. So it's no coincidence that the fact that the incident didn't have a a more catastrophic outcome was also due to his experience and his also commitment to excellence, and always trying to understand not only the what or the how, but also the why behind things. So I was really I was quite fascinated, and I remember that also I was trying to apply some of this thinking on board the ship. So as I was keeping a navigational watch together with my lookout, I was trying to think of some emergency scenarios that could happen at any time and what I could do. So I was thinking that, okay, if now I have a man overboard, what am I going to do? Or if now I have a fire, what am I going to do? Or if there's an emergency situation, what am I going to do? Because yeah, you have everything on the so-called emergency checklist, but I was trying to just make this, just think what I'm going to do, so kind of a bit be prepared, because in the end, even though you prepare a lot and you train a lot, especially in the maritime industry, when you do a lot of simulator courses, you do train a lot. These are very, let's say, sterile environments where you kind of know that you are training, but it's not the real life, let's say. So you are training under some sterile conditions, and in the case of an actual emergency, you might react differently. So that's why I wanted to kind of be prepared for events and not to be surprised by them. Although I think this, I'm not sure if this was in the end achievable, but yeah.
It depends, I think, always. I mean, definitely the mindset that you took from him is something that can help a lot. And this kind of mindset is most likely what made it possible for him to handle that situation that great. In one of his many talks about the situation, he also said he wasn't really prepared for the situation. They didn't practice water landing or anything. So it's not like he was trained for that and he made a perfect water landing. It was a very rare circumstance to even do that. And he had only one classroom training in his whole life about that.
Only theoretical training, exactly.
He had he was otherwise so prepared and he was so great in handling the airplane that he could manage, I assume. So if he would have started just as a job, I'm just a pilot, it's just my day job, and he wouldn't strive for that excellence, most likely he wouldn't have had the skills to handle the situation that perfectly or that good. So it's really, really core here.
Yeah, although it's difficult to prove this, but I think it's safe to say that, yeah, definitely his knowledge and experience counted a lot. Yeah, I mean, just imagine that by the time the plane flew into the flock of birds, and by the time it landed on the water, there were like 3 minutes only. So 3 minutes. That is, I think even less, 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes. So imagine that in 2.5 minutes. Imagine just to sit there in the observer's seat and watch the events going on. I think it would have been quite an interesting experience. And what he mentioned later, yeah, very scary. But what he mentioned later on, and I also find this very, very, very interesting, is that he and the first officer, I think his name is Jeff Skiles, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't work before. So it was that day, it was the first time when they've met. So they've met for the first time, and Captain Sully said that they were working together like, in that day, they worked together like they were knowing each other for years. So you have two people, obviously they do the same job, but they've never worked together. And in a crisis situation, in 2.5 minutes of a crisis situation, they worked together and managed to safely land the plane and save the lives of 150 passengers. That is really something to.
That is actually really fascinating. That's true. Because usually you think for these kind of things you need a long time together. Like if you see the rally drivers or race car drivers, if you have these rallies with two people, they're usually experienced teams. They're playing together because it's fractions of seconds, and they need a lot of experience together. But actually, in this scenario, it wasn't like that at all. It was two strangers sitting next to each other, not even getting to know each other for an hour of a flight. This is actually, yeah.
Can you think of a similar case that happened in the maritime industry? So it reminds me of MÄRSK back in 2013. Do you remember of it?
Yeah, I do remember the MÆRSK, the MÄRSK. Luckily, I have to say, I never had anything like this in my time on board. The only thing that I can think of, which is not in any case comparable with this, I had a case which impressed me. I'm thinking of this, what you said with Sully and his first officer working together. I had an incident when I was on board the ship where we were approaching a port in China in a narrow fairway. I was steering by hand, and the officer of the watch, there were a lot of fishing boats. I guess you guys remember. There were loads of fishing boats. They were crossing the fairway from all directions. There was oncoming traffic with traffic behind us, and I could feel that the officer of the watch was getting a bit nervous. And at some point, the captain was on the bridge. The captain jumped in, and he took over command. He steered us through this whole thing. Ease of mind. You could see that the officer was breaking sweat, and the captain didn't even move. The captain remained where he was. He took over. He remained so cool. I have to say, I didn't stress at all. The captain had this aura of calm. He brought us through the whole thing. Afterwards, he handed over the command again to the officer. He remained at the bridge, and then after the watch, we had a small debrief of the situation, which I really to say it was something that stuck. I don't know if you experienced anything, Marvin, similar to this, or
you could see always the difference in experience when it comes to the confidence of handling such situations. And I think this is part of that. In this case, you had two quite experienced captains. I think in the case of MÄRSK, the captain was also quite experienced. He was quite good in handling that ship. I think maybe he profited also from MÄRSK policy that they usually go on sister ships. So he was used to the MÄRSK, or at least to this type of ship. And I remember actually that the officers, they seemed exactly to know what to do. Like the chief mate, he didn't go back to the bridge. He knew exactly one weakness was the communication between the engine, especially from the thruster valves that were flooded back then. So he stayed in that position. The captain took over the command on the bridge. The officer was there to assist him. And I think an experienced bridge team, even if they didn't work together so experienced, they were experienced with their own roles. That definitely helps a lot. I think this is a commonality between this non-incident, the smaller scenario that you described, and these two incidents that we had actually. And I think you can have this in many industries, not just in the maritime or in the.
I think we jumped too far. I think it's it would be okay to tell our listeners what happened with the MÄRSK.
True.
Right, because we do. I think we went a bit off track. I will read a bit from the report because it summarizes very well what happened. And I personally found a lot of similarities between this incident and with the US flight with the Miracle on the Hudson. So on the evening of 1st of February 2013, so 4 years after, a severe leakage occurred in the container ship MÄRSK which was loaded with 14,000 containers, so almost to its full capacity, and was about to pass southbound through the Suez Canal. So, as you know, when you want to pass the Suez Canal, you have two convoys. So you have the northbound people, the ships that go from Red Sea to Mediterranean, and the southbound when you go from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. And the leakage was caused by a mechanical breakdown of the stern thruster. So these ships, this MÄRSK, it's part of a class of ships that are quite special, I would say, especially when it comes to container ships, because they have four thrusters, so two bow thrusters and two stern thrusters. You don't usually see this even in ultra large container ships. You only have two bow thrusters, but this class of ships was and is, I think, even today quite special, with the accommodation in the middle almost.
They were for quite some independence to be less dependent on tugboats and pilots, I think, for line of.
Yeah, increased the maneuverability at
Right.
low speeds and during port maneuvers, definitely. So there was a leakage that was caused by a mechanical breakdown on the stern thruster, and at the aft of the ship, and the ship's shaft tunnel was flooded, and there was a bulkhead between the shaft tunnel and the main engine room. There was a bulkhead, and because of the hydrostatic pressure of the water, the bulkhead, because of the hydrostatic water pressure, the bulkhead couldn't withstand the pressure, and the water also eventually went into the engine room, and the engine room was flooded. And obviously, the situation became complicated because the ship just initiated passage to enter the Suez Canal. So I think it's the worst time when you want to have an emergency situation. So the ship lost its propulsion, electric power, steering, and maneuverability. Actually, no, the loss of ship's propulsion, electric power, and maneuverability could be foreseen and eventually occurred. Sorry, so this event eventually occurred, and throughout the course of events, all crew members were constantly disturbed and highly stressed by the sound of countless alarms. And whoever worked on board the ship knows very well what I'm talking about, the never-ending alarms. I think there was also a term coined some time ago, alarm fatigue.
Yeah.
And which made it extremely difficult to concentrate on the many challenges that these guys were facing. And despite a series of technical breakdowns and system weaknesses, the shipboard organization remained resilient. And the ship's officers and crew managed to contain the emergency situation and bring the ship alongside the Suez Canal container terminal. There was the port side container terminal on the left. So I also found this case very interesting, also because back then when I think it was somewhere in 2016 when I came across this incident report. By the way, if everyone wants to read it, they can go to Danish Maritime Accident Investigation Board. That is dmaib.com, and they can use the search function to search for the MÄRSK report. It's a very nice read during the weekend, or it's a very nice weekend read. So if some of our listeners is curious, I would highly recommend it, especially if you're in the maritime industry. I really, again, what I was intrigued about this incident was about decision making under crisis situation, because I told you that I've heard about the miracle of the Hudson when I was attending a maritime resource management seminar, And I remember very well that the instructor, who was a captain, he was explaining a bit that there's a difference between an emergency situation and a crisis situation. So an emergency situation can be a man overboard, can be a fire, can be a collision, but a crisis, but a crisis situation, there are multiple emergency situations. So imagine that you might have a collision, and part of that collision you have flooding, and it might also be fire. So you already have 3 emergency situations, and you have to prioritize because you have very limited resources on board, human resources especially, and you have to prioritize. Very important to prioritize. What do I take care of first? Do I take care of the flooding? Do I take care of the fire, and so on? And although this didn't quite had multiple emergencies, taking into account the area where it happened, I would definitely treat it as a crisis situation, because they were dealing with something that it was, let's say, it was a novel situation. They weren't expecting this. And I was always intrigued.
I think even if it's just an emergency, you're not expecting it either. But definitely, I think the combination is always very important. It's like for many emergencies, it's a combination of factors that lead to it. But for a crisis, it's the same. If they would have the same emergency, meaning break-in of water in the stern thruster and loss of propulsion from that, but if they would have that on open sea, they could have had more room to maneuver. They wouldn't. The loss of propulsion wouldn't have been such a navigational problem. It would still be an emergency, especially for the engineers with the engine room flooding, and the rest of the ship team can support them. But now the rest of the ship team wasn't available to support them because they had to deal with additional emergencies resulting from that one. It was like a chain of events. The break-in of water led to the loss of propulsion. The loss of propulsion led to navigational crisis due to the traffic and due to the limited space, to the confined waters.
Yeah, because the ship was in a convoy. So I read in the report that they were having a stern an LNG carrier, and in front they were having another container ship, and usually the distance between them, it's not more than 1.5 miles, because you can have longer distances, and with a very large ship that has already gained momentum, you can just stop it immediately. So the stopping distance is quite long. And also the wind was not helping them that much, because they were at the time of incident, there were northwesterly winds of around 20 to 25 knots. And on a container ship, especially this one was almost fully loaded, the windage area, it's very big, so you don't want it acts like a sail.
So the loss of propulsion is not just that you're drifting on, you're actually changing your course if you don't have an active propulsion anymore.
Exactly. And if you read through the timeline, you will see that the captain took certain decisions that helped him later on safely bring the ship alongside. If you read the timeline, you could see that the captain took certain decisions that helped him later on safely bring the ship alongside. And this is very important. I remember one thing where the engineers told the captain to be slow on the main engine revolutions, not to force the engine, which in the end, after he realized that the water was coming in the engine room, a loss of engine propulsion was imminent. So what he did was to actually increase the power to full ahead in order to gain a bit some speed. Although he knew that the engine was most probably not going to support this, he increased the main engine to full ahead in order to gain some speed, which allowed him to go just the edge on the southernmost of the breakwater and turn left to go to the container terminal and clear the fairway, clear the Suez Canal for the other ships. So this was a critical decision that he took, which allowed him to gain a bit more speed, because, as you know, with the rudder alone, if you don't have any speed and you don't have any propulsion, it's
You don't have
useless.
any
And,
navigational
yeah,
capabilities.
and they were trying to make fast tags in order to assist with the to assist with the maneuvering, and those lines was always breaking because they were under enormous stress.
Too much
so
pressure.
Yeah.
Too much pressure, exactly.
I think he
And in
ordered
the
4
end,
or 5 tags for this.
4 or 5 tags.
4 or
Yeah,
5 tags.
I
think
think
this,
all tags were there assisting.
which was a good thing. I mean, if I understood correctly, they couldn't get the leakage under control. I mean, even with the shutting the watertight doors, they had kept having this ingress of water. So for them, it was kind of a blessing to be close by somewhere where they could make fast. But then, of course, on the other hand, yeah, if you have a tanker behind you, you have another ship in front of you. There's not enough. Then there's no room to maneuver really. I mean, you're in this narrow channel, so yeah, it's
They have
hard.
already passed the point of no return. There's no point of no return. I mean, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
the
you
only
cannot turn
chance that
around
he had
anyway.
was basically this left, turn to port side to go towards the container terminal. If he would have lost power before and the ability to maneuver, he would have been done. So this was his chance to get there, what you said, to increase the speed to reach that point and get the tug system.
You mentioned that the tug lines were breaking. Was there a reason why they didn't try the tugs to push? I mean, maybe there was no space on this side, etc. But I thought in the case where you realize that you can't make fast the tugs, you can at least assist with pushing.
I mean, if you go and have a look at the map, there is the channel, and I think the width of the channel, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it's somewhere around maybe 200 or 300 meters, maybe. If I'm not mistaken, I don't want to say something stupid, but actually, it's not about space, but they didn't have. I mean, the only solution for the tugs, I think, would have been to push sideways, but he definitely wanted to avoid running aground on either side of the channel, because it would make it highly improper. Then it would make extremely difficult the refloating of the ship, because in the end, the whole main engine was flooded. There were 16 meters of water in the water level in the engine room was 16 meters. So this was kind of his main point, or his main goal was to avoid to run aground, because it would make the offloading of cargo extremely difficult. You can do it. You don't have a container ship of that size with cranes to pick up that. So So he desperately wanted to reach that exit, that left exit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, most likely the points and the ship where the tugs could push, where it's reinforced enough to push, they are not exactly in the front, not exactly in the aft, so they would have a stronger sideways trajectory and not so much turning. And he needed actually the tugs mainly for the turning.
And imagine that when the ship is making headway, the tug is not very effective, because the tug in the end applies a transverse force, transverse thrust, and with forward momentum, the transverse thrust becomes less efficient the more speed you gain. So but the tugs definitely helped when the ship in the end lost its propulsion, and they let go their anchors, and also they had, in the end, it's also a matter of luck. So the wind changed from northwest to southwest, and the wind was favorable, that was pushing the ship towards the quay. So the ship changed that direction just at the right time. So in the end, you also need a bit some luck
with different weather conditions, it would have been always a different output. I think this is one of the things what we said also the last time. You have so many factors, and in hindsight, of course, it's always easy to say, okay, but with that wind he should have done that. But maybe in that moment he wasn't even aware of the wind changing. And in this case, it was lucky for him. Imagine if the wind would have changed from southwest to northwest, and suddenly his maneuver would have failed, even though he did the best thing he could do in that moment, because not every factor is under his control, and maybe in this moment you don't have the time to constantly refresh all the information because you're so busy with other things. Yeah.
But yeah, just simply taking a look at the report, which I think, in the end, there are several, when it comes to an event, there are multiple narratives. You have an external narrative that is transmitted to us, and you have an internal narrative. We cannot know for sure exactly what happened, but
Of course.
reading through the accident report, you would find the excellent leadership, resilience of the captain, who managed to take certain important decisions when faced with a situation that they may not have been trained before. Same like Captain Sully, who was faced with a novel situation. Because I remember also reading in a report that there was this. There is a difference between being skillful when you are not surprised and being skillful when you are surprised.
Yeah.
When you are, it's a huge difference. I mean, when you are not surprised, when you are in a simulator, you know what's going, you know what's coming, you know what you're preparing for. But when you are out there in the real life and it hits you, it's a different story being skillful there when you are faced with a novel situation. And
yeah, I think there are two key takeaways from both of these scenarios. First of all, of course, the importance of training. I mean, with Captain Sully, he was trained at least once in classroom training for water landing. If he wouldn't have even this one training, even this little basic knowledge about it, the situation might have been different. And he was trained routinely and experienced and again on the handling of the airplane. And the same thing, I'm pretty sure the captain of the MÆRSK in that moment was very well trained. And the second thing then is, of course, still, how do you actually handle it? How do you transfer your training knowledge in the actual situation, handling the whole thing under stress? Not just you have the knowledge in theory, but to actually apply it in such a stressful emergency or crisis situation. Yeah, I think this is something that many people experience also in their normal life.
Yeah.
I mean, you have other scenarios where it's also the more experienced you are with something, the better you get, the better you handle it under crisis. I think, Yanni, didn't you tell me this anecdote with sailing on the catamaran once? Wasn't it quite similar with handling it?
Yeah, I wouldn't compare to any of those cases, but actually, I when I was young, I was sailing a lot. We were sailing in 14 feet catamaran, and I used to go with a friend of mine. Was always the two of us, so we were sailing a lot. And with this type of boat, it can occur that you capsize. We did this sometimes just for fun. It's not a big thing. You tip over with the thing, you pull it up again, you continue sailing. Everything is fine. So this one day we took a friend of ours. It was light wind, everything okay. We told them about the whole experience, everything. We were sailing fine. Everything was good. At some point, we were on the Baltic Sea. We were heading back back for the port, and the wind picked up. It got crazy. The waves got higher. We still had way to go, and at some point we capsized. We told them everything. The situation was under control. We tipped the boat over. We came back. We jumped on. We continued sailing. But I realized the person at that moment, for us, it was a normal situation. We've done it, I don't know, just for fun, several hundreds of times. It feels like, but the person panicked at that moment. As I said, in the end, everything was fine. But even though preparing the person mentally, afterwards, actually, we went again sailing with the person. Once we were back, realized nothing. There was actually no danger. It was a normal thing. We went sailing several times afterwards. Became an enthusiastic sailor, actually. But nowadays, if something happens, perfectly fine. The person knows what to do. It's nothing. But at that moment, it was something new. Even though we said what could happen. I think if you get the training, if you experience something like this and you've done it, you don't think anymore. You know what to happen. You can just you run. It was, for us at least, we were running our routine. We knew one person was swimming to that side, the other person to that side. We got the thing back. But yeah, this is the training and doing it.
Yeah. I mean, even if you expect something or if you know something can happen, it surprises you when it actually happens. And one good thing in this MÆRSK case was that he was actually aware that he will lose propulsion in a while, so he could react. And it didn't come as that much of a surprise. The whole emergency of water ingress, of course, was still pretty surprising for him, I believe, and not in a positive way. And I think actually it's something that many people, as I said, experience in their daily lives. You have these kind of car trainings. I mean, maybe not here in Cyprus so much, but in Germany it's quite common that you have the automobile club who's offering safety trainings where you try, for example, you practice braking on ice or steering your car on ice, because it behaves very, very different, and it's a huge emergency in reality when you have this kind of ice. And people who actually did it a few times, they react much better in reality, because they don't just have the theoretical training. Anyway, you learn in theory that if you have ice, you shouldn't just brake, you need to brake piece by piece because your wheels will block, etc. But nobody is able to actually, or few people are able to transfer that.
It's much better if you experience it once. You know how the car behaves, how the situation is.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, you know the next time.
So I think it's something everybody can.
No, I think as you mentioned this in Germany, I think also in Sweden and Finland and
for sure.
The Scandinavian countries, they actually have, before they take their license, they actually have to somehow learn how to drift and know how to drift. Yeah, there is I think Scandinavian something. There was a special maneuver with the car.
Okay.
So yeah, because you cannot. I mean, how do you want people to know how to recover a car if they lost control of it and they're drifting without actually practicing that maneuver? Definitely the importance of training is actually it's really important, and also repetition. I mean, to have a constant training regime. I remember once from a neuroscientist, I think I've watched an interview, I don't remember now his name, and he said that when it comes to learning, so you have a top-down approach in the beginning, when you are willingly, you focus all your attention to learn a specific skill. So it's a top-down thing, in terms that you have to think a lot, you have to put a lot of effort. But then as you learn it and as you practice it, it somehow becomes bottom up. So it's a reflective. So you do it without thinking. Imagine when you walk on the street, you don't think when you walk. You take it as granted. When you talk, you do the same things. And there are a lot of things that we do in our day-to-day life that we don't think that we are doing them. We are doing them out of
it's this procedural memory, yeah.
Yeah, with the frequent fire drill as well, taking advantage of the simulator training, so you can practice a lot of scenarios, and practicing them regularly gives you a better chance of having some reflections and knowing intuitively what to do in an actual emergency. Yanis?
Yeah. I'm still here. Yeah. No, I was thinking of what you're saying. This repetition. That you kind of the moment. I think if you don't have to think about something, if it becomes routine, basically, it helps you. Or at least I realized that from my personal experience, that it helped me a lot in let's call them stress situations. If it was with sailing or other things that I experienced, that if the first time I experienced something, I was always happy. Going back to the incident of sailing, for example, I had certain things that I experienced where it was a new situation, but I had somebody experienced with me. So we were going through it. Afterwards, I encountered it by myself, but I knew what to do. Basically, I had lived through my first drill. I was taught. So the next time I knew what could happen or what to do when it happened. Then the more often you do it, the easier it becomes, and the less you think. You just act and you get through it without really thinking.
Yanis, I want to ask you. I want to ask you a question. Do you think that? So you said that you've actually did it for fun. You capsized for fun, but you were actually you're actually sailing. So you're out there at the sea, correct?
Yeah. It was actually the first time I capsized was for training purposes, and we had a small motorboat with us, and we were capsizing the boat on purpose just to learn the way to upright the boat again. This was not on a catamaran. This was, I think, on that time it was a smaller boat. Anyway, I think a laser or pirate, doesn't matter. But we were actually doing this with our trainer at that time. We had a small motorboat next to us. We were capsizing it on purpose. And then I remember the first day I was trying it, I had sore arms afterwards because I was struggling. I was fighting, and I couldn't get the boat upright. So, and I was thinking afterwards, if this would have been the first time in an incident where you have waves, where you have a lot of wind, I'm not sure if I could have made it out of that without help. So we practiced it in calm weather conditions, and when it actually happened, at some point, actually on the smaller boats, I even managed that moment that when the boat tips over, if you're fast enough, you can just turn around. Step on the I'm missing the English term for it, and the fin that's coming out underneath. You can step on it, you can upright it immediately. So, but this is at some point when I was doing it a certain number of times, I was doing this automatically. I wasn't even thinking about it. I realized this is the moment, and then we did it for fun, just to train it. But later on, when the real thing happened, we did it without words. Everybody knew what to do, and we were solving the issue.
Did you feel a difference between the moment when you tried to do it on purpose during the training with a small boat, and then when you did it with the actual catamaran? Did you find the difference?
I have to.
Was there something different that you would not have expected?
No, it was okay. Okay, the thing is, there were a few incidents where you realize that's about to happen. Okay, sometimes you have those moments where you don't expect it to happen. So and then it comes as a surprise, which is a shock in the first moment. But if you're trained, basically the reflexes kick in and you start acting. I had one incident where I didn't. We were sailing in late summer, beginning of autumn, on the Baltic Sea, and the wind picked up at this point where we were far away from the port, and it got so strong that we uprighted the catamaran, but because of the waves, the catamaran was coming back. There was wind coming underneath it, and it was flying up again. So it kept. I think we uprighted it 15 times, and it kept just capsizing without us even being able to get on it. And in the end, the water police came, and they pulled us in because we couldn't get it. That was a moment where I was, it was not nice, let's say. We were still close to shore. It was okay, but this was a moment where I was feeling helpless. I mean, we knew what to do. We did it correct. We got the boat up, but because due to the weather, it was just capsizing again. So this was a stress moment.
Even so, you didn't just do a theoretical or simulator training. You did the actual thing. You were actually practiced with doing it. Even in that case, it didn't fully help you in an emergency situation because the situation was so out of your control that you couldn't do it anymore. Huh? In this one case, but in many other cases, I assume you were able to just go back on.
In all other cases, it was perfectly fine. Okay, at that point we were still younger. We were not heavy enough for that weather with that boat. Okay. So that was one of the incidents. If we would have been heavier, we could have. All other situations we managed, so that was never a problem.
But this is one thing that is also, you can take it away and you can transfer it basically to accidents in the maritime industry, in any industry, that even if you are perfectly trained, even if you are routinely practiced with something, even if you do it perfectly fine, there is still a chance for an accident to happen. There is now no justification at all for accidents to happen, and most of them, some kind of mistake was done. But it's quite easy to judge afterwards to say, if you would have done this and this, it would be different for you. Yeah, okay, if you would have just taken someone else with you, someone more heavy, then it would have been avoidable, but
should have been more heavy. Why did you go out with this weather at this time?
Okay,
There's always, but this is always the thing. Afterwards, it's always easy to say, when we started, everything was fine. But yeah, if it helps you if you know what to do. In this case, we knew what to do. We were not, let's say, equipped with the correct. We didn't have the equipment or the in this case, the weight or what we needed to make it out of the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I also said this last time that we live in such a complex world where trying to avoid accidents is, I think, nonsense. And we should spend more focus on trying to be prepared when we are faced with an emergency situation rather than trying to avoid one, because I think it's almost impossible if you take into account the complexity of how the world works.
Yeah, I agree with you if you say you should be prepared for an emergency situation. Doesn't mean that you're not trying to avoid an accident. For me, this is actually exactly the same. Nobody should be in the mind to say, we will do everything and a fire will never happen on board. You should be ready for a fire to happen. No matter how good you could do it, no matter what safety precautions you follow, it might happen. And then you will be ready for the emergency. Because if you're ready for the emergency, you can actually avoid a bigger accident or at least a full-blown crisis.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, what I was referring to, but if you're taken by surprise, then
still, the more you're prepared for it,
yeah.
For me, an emergency and accident is not necessarily the same.
Okay, what I was
yeah.
No, what I was referring to is that obviously you will do as much as possible to be proactive and avoid. No one wants to have accidents, but the idea of creating a system where you want to avoid as much as possible accidents, I think it's something utopic. I mean, it's something that I mean, you'd rather spend resources and focus on training your people to deal once something happened. And once they are faced with an emergency situation.
Yeah, I think you have to just level it with each other. I mean, for sure, you should increase your accident prevention measures, but at one point you will do everything that is reasonably possible. And further accident prevention might cost so much effort, so much, maybe also just money that is better spent in being prepared for the accident. Because if you just try to prevent it more, you will have a little bit more preparedness. But if it happens, it will be a catastrophe because your people are not prepared at all for it. If you instead lower your accident, no, I'm in a loss of words. I'm very sorry. If you lower the money that you spend on preventing an accident, but instead be prepared for an accident, it might occur, but it will not be a catastrophe. You know what I mean with this too?
Yeah, but think of it from the perspective of the outcome. What would you rather have? What I mean. I would rather have a lot of incidents, but to have a quite positive outcome instead of not preparing at all and just have a very big accident with fatalities.
Yes, so, exactly. This is what I mean.
In the end, it's the outcome that matters. It's completely fine to have incidents. It's completely fine as long as
incidents. Incidents, yes. But this is exactly. If something happens every 100,000 hours, let's say, but you're prepared for it and you're handling it, and it doesn't become a full-blown crisis, that is much better than if it happens only every 1 millionth hour, but then it becomes a full-blown crisis because you're not prepared for it.
Yeah. Yeah, but and I think it's almost impossible to avoid.
You can never avoid everything, so you need to prepare for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I think everything in reality depends on the likelihood. If you do this kind of risk analysis, you're always treating the severity of the outcome with the likelihood of the outcome. I mean, airplane pilots are one of the most trained jobs, I believe, even more so than most maritime people. But still, they were not trained for water landing because it was deemed so unlikely to happen that it was not used. I don't know if this changed after the miracle on the Hudson, maybe, but I honestly don't know of another scenario where it was that relevant. So while it was saving many, many lives in that case, the question is it needed to be, do you need to be more prepared for this scenario, or is it just so unlikely? Honestly, I can't say it. It's an open-ended question. I don't think we can answer that.
Yeah, but if you think about it, instead of trying to anticipate what scenarios might happen and try to train pilots for those particular scenarios, I think it's also worth mentioning or worth trying to train pilots to cope with situations that they've never dealt before, so they know how to do it. I think this is critical, to train them how to deal with situations that they've never faced before, instead of training them for 30 situations, because this is what you can only think of, 30 situations, and then you have the 31st incident that they've never dealt with, and you have a catastrophic.
I mean, the more likely something is to happen, the better you need to be prepared for this specific scenario, but you need to have a transferability of your skills. If you're able to transfer your skills, if you're able to transfer the handling of one emergency to another emergency, because you are great in handling the ship or the airplane, etc., this allows you to transfer emergencies, skills in an emergency, and to handle the specific situation.
Yes, but this means placing a lot of trust on the people and less trust on, because for the other situations you can develop procedures, you can develop emergency checklists, whereas for a novel event, for an unforeseen event, you place basically your trust on the judgment and the skills of the pilot. So you basically don't tell him anymore what to do through checklists. You just rely on his training and input and expertise.
In these scenarios, this is needed. You rely on the airplane pilot, on the maritime pilot, or on the captain, or even on the whole bridge team. And I think, honestly, I don't know it, but I doubt that there was a checklist ready for that scenario of MÄRSK. He was highly trained. He knew how to handle certain emergencies.
There was a checklist for flooding, but
not for the navigational causes that followed that flooding. So they were.
I think this is also one thing. If you prepare your crew for certain different scenarios, and you're properly trained on those, it might be more likely afterwards, if you could get a combination of those, that you know what to do in the single one. It might be easier for you to prioritize afterwards and still combine those, let's say. Even if you encounter several things. Yes, for just the flooding, you can pull out your checklist. But if you have a combination of those, you will know the single incidents, and then if you experience it, you did it or did the training on that, you're more likely to know your steps and combine those and come out of the situation.
In the end, the checklist is just a guide, just because if you are in that emergency situation, you might forget certain things, which is absolutely normal. So it's more like it's more like a guide, just to briefly tell you what you have to do, but it still relies a lot on your actions and on your previous training.
Because everything is different, and I mean, it can help. I think in this case, if they had a flooding checklist, quite likely, you can follow a little bit more the checklist and focus your energy, your thoughts on other parts of this whole crisis, because you're very prepared for one part of it, and you can transfer your skills, your knowledge, whatever you learned, to the rest of it where you don't have a checklist for. So the checklist is assisting you with the other things too.
I think it's a good thing assisting. I think you cannot solely rely on a checklist. If you don't have a properly trained personnel, you can't use a checklist. If you have a checklist for flooding, that basically you have a glance on it, and you don't need to spend let's say, so much thinking on the flooding itself, because you're just pulling out the checklist on that and say, okay, we need to do step 1, step 2, step 3. You might have more time to consider the, in case of MMS, to consider the other factors there. Where are we at with the moment? Where do we have to go to get to the pier? I have a ship in front of me. I have a ship in the back of me. I have a pilot who's speaking a different language. He needs to communicate to the port. So, and then you have the alarms going off one after the other. So basically, there's a lot of things that influence you at that moment, or that might stress you at that moment. So if you have something that might assist you in a way, it can be a good thing, like a checklist. Also to make sure that you might, in a stress situation, not forget something. Even if you know the steps, just to go back to the list and see if you have it.
But what I deduced from all this, not so many years spent at sea, was that it's also important how the crew perceives a checklist and perceives a procedure. Do they perceive it as a valuable resource for them to follow during an emergency? Do they really think that this is going to help me, or do they see it more as a liability? Think that, hey, I have to fill up this checklist because otherwise I'm afraid that I might have I will be liable in front of the company and they will tell me, hey, why didn't? So it's very important. How does the crew perceive the checklist? Do they really see it as a resource and they really want to use it because it's really helping them? Or is just a thing that I just want to do it because I don't want to have problem with the company and then they cannot get the insurance in the end because and so on. This is very important as well.
I think in the case of Scully, actually, he didn't follow the checklist. He initiated some steps that are later on the checklist.
They did follow the checklist. So the emergency there was double engine failure. So both engines failed, and the first officer, so the Captain Sully took the con because it was the first pilot. It was the first officer, the co-pilot, who took off the plane, and then the emergency happened, and then the captain took over the control, and then the Jeff Skiles, the first officer, he started to run through the checklist in order to begin they tried several times to restart the engines because I mean, you have to try to restart the engine.
Yeah. I just thought there was something that they moved an item up from the checklist, which was later on the checklist.
Some things I don't know exactly.
Okay, never mind.
I think it comes back to this whole thing of what culture you have, what mindset you have on board, about the airplane, about the ship. This defines how they perceive it. Do you have a culture of compliance only? Then you say, okay, I have my checklist, I follow these steps, this is all I can do. Or do you have a safety awareness mindset? Do you have an actual culture where people are doing their own thoughts in regards to how can I improve the safety, what can I do for safe navigation now, how can I best handle this thing? Then they will still use the checklist, but they can also evaluate whether one point of the checklist might not be applicable now, or whether there might be a more useful use of the limited resources of the crew, etc., in this moment than following this point.
Yeah, because unfortunately I have heard and also I was told by some friends on experiences from some companies, some management strategy to somehow fill the gap of inexperienced people on board with checklist and compliance. So like we are creating a system or an environment where we're trying to control the people on board through checklists. So we tell them exactly what to do, and this might cover up for their lack of experience or lack of recruiting and or lack of training. But this is not a winning strategy in the end.
Not in the long term. I can imagine in the short term, maybe 1-2 smaller incidents can be prevented by this because they have an actual checklist. But I doubt that it will be a long time until they run into an incident that is not fully covered with a checklist, or where it's not 100% applicable in the way that it was designed. And if they are not able to transfer to identify the differences, then
From the moment you start doing something that you don't understand what you're doing, I think everything is lost. From the moment you just start doing, reacting to things, but you don't understand exactly what we are doing there and the why behind, you are just lost. I mean,
I think this is actually also what Captain Sully said in many of his interviews. The why of the safety was so important. You need to know why you are doing what you're doing now, not just okay. Now I do
not
this.
just the what or the how. Yeah. Why am I doing it? And and I really wish we had. I'm not sure what now is the state of the training in general in the maritime industry. I haven't been that connected with it, but I wish we had more real life training as you had, Yanis, with the catamaran, with the actual being out there. I mean, there is just so much that you can do in a simulator, but just going out there. And I know that, for example, for basic safety trainings, we have you have the swimming pool, and you don your life jacket and you jump for 4.5 meters or something. You jump in the swimming pool. But I really wish we had this scenarios as close as possible to reality for different things, different emergencies. This would really help a lot, because in the end, as I said, the simulator can bring a lot of benefits, but is a sterile environment.
That is true, but I think trainings, they are always kind of sterile because you always know you have some fallback. Like when Yanis was training the first time to capsize the catamaran or the small sailing boat, he knew that there was a motorboat to pick him up. So it was not the feeling of an emergency, but definitely
it helps in the real situation later, but yeah, it's the same thing what you said earlier. If you go into a simulator exercise, and they give you a scenario, you're running your ship through a fairway or something. I mean, they put you in the simulator to train an emergency or to train an incident. So you already have in your back of your mind something is going to happen now. So you're somehow prepared, or if you're on the ship and something happens, you don't expect it. You don't start your watch expecting now an emergency will happen. If somebody puts you in a simulator, I think you have a different mindset. At least for me, this is what I remember, that when I was going into a simulator, also when I did this, I knew that the boat was capsizing, so I already had the mindset on it. When I encountered the capsizing the first time, I wasn't expecting it. It came kind of a shock, but immediately I knew what to do, and I was getting out of the situation. It was not a problem. But the first moment, I didn't expect it, to be honest.
You cannot
so it's
train
also
this
a different
surprise. The element of surprise is something that you can't really train, I believe.
If you go for a training, you know that you're there to train for this. Undoubtedly, it helps you in the end if the real thing happens, because it's not the first time you encounter it. You have done it already, even in a let's say protected environment. But if somebody puts you in a simulator, usually something is going to happen. Or you're going there for a training of some kind of incident.
But the more realistic, the more close to the real scenario the training is, the easier it gets to transfer the skill. I think this is something
definitely,
can all agree to. And then
definitely.
You need to see how you can actually do it. I mean, it's pretty difficult to train real ship situations, be it navigational, ship handling, or firefighting on a ship, to train it on a real ship.
Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. So I'm not saying that it is not a good situation or not a good thing. I fully support this. But I had the experience when I went to the simulator and we were doing. I knew something is going to happen. So in the real world, it would help me in the real world afterwards, definitely. But yeah, it's this. I think you have a kind of different mindset.
It also depends on the, let's say that the training and the scenarios. But I remember when we had a really cool instructor, captain, and he was giving us, he was kind of encouraging us to discover our limits and even make mistakes. So we actually see how the ship reacts, for example, during a ship handling situation. And I think this is also very important to have a mindset where okay, you practice certain scenarios, but also kind of leave it free, leave it open, and try to push a bit the boundaries and try to find the limits of the ship as well. And I think I always envy, for example, the test pilots that they actually after the airplane is made, when they have to do the test flight, they push the airplane to its boundaries of handling maneuverability. And I think kind of this also happens when you take a ship from the shipyard. So from there, you gain a lot of experience as well. These are actually situations where you are allowed to somehow play with the ship and discover its limits. This you can't replicate that anywhere else.
That's true, but I think unfortunately that's quite often actually the crew from the shipyard, or I know also pilots are taking over this role of shipyard captain. And it's not the crew that is later on taking over the vessel in reality. That's maybe actually a missed opportunity, because even if they are both on board, if they cooperate, the crew could learn a lot from that situation. True. Because you rarely get the chance later on.
Yeah, this is also one thing that I was trying every time when we had a pilot on board, and I was lucky enough to be on the bridge and at the maneuvering stations, that I was always trying to collaborate with the pilot and see why he's doing certain maneuvers. Because I've visited and I've been with the ship in certain ports where the entrance was extremely difficult and the pilots were very experienced, like Southampton, for example. And it was just great just being there and having the pilot explaining me. I was just a third officer or second officer and just explaining me, okay, this is why I'm doing this, and just watching him work. Although I was not doing it myself, it was still, but I also want to touch something that we unfortunately didn't have time to talk that much, but maybe it's going to be a topic for our next podcast, which is mentoring. Because I genuinely believe that mentoring, especially at sea, plays a very important role. And I was also fortunate enough to work with amazing captains. They were both captains and mentors to me, and they were encouraging me to do things that they were not on my job description. So it's also extremely important to allow. I think the cruise industry is doing this, where they have a system where even the cadets and the junior officers are doing the ship handling and are doing the port entrance maneuver under the supervision of the captain. So at least they are given the command to. They are not given the command, but they are given the control of the ship to experience that real ship handling. And I think this is coupled with sessions of mentoring for senior officers. It's something that it doesn't involve so many resources, it doesn't involve so much money. You're still doing that. It's just allowing people, less experienced people, to practice, not only in the simulator, but especially on the ship during those circumstances and environment that you cannot replicate anywhere. It's something that I would love to see more companies adopting it.
So guys, I think we can discuss next time about mentoring and its importance. And I think it's safe to say that we covered some quite interesting topics this podcast. So we talk about the importance of decision making in a crisis situation, and we saw a couple of examples from aviation as well as maritime industry, how certain decisions were made in a crisis situation, and as well as the importance of constant training and repetition that would help us deal with novel situations. I think it was fun, and I hope that our listeners enjoyed it. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for being with us. And we will put more resources and more links in the description So please check the description, and you will find there also the reports and everything that we discussed. And see you next time.
Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Everybody for listening.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.